The flour sack slipped from Sarah Mitchell's trembling fingers and hit the mercantile floor with a soft thud, sending up a small white cloud that seemed to mock her exhaustion as she swayed on her feet in the sweltering Montana summer heat of 1882. "Miss Mitchell, are you quite all right, Mr. Henderson, the store owner, hurried around the counter, his weathered face creased with concern as he steadied her by the elbow. Sarah pressed a hand to her forehead, willing the dizziness to pass. "I'm fine, truly. Just a bit tired is all." The words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Tired didn't begin to describe the bone-deep weariness that had become her constant companion over the past 8 months, since cholera had swept through their homestead, taking her parents within days of each other and leaving her, at 22 years old, solely responsible for her 4 younger siblings. "You don't look fine," Mr. Henderson said gently. "When's the last time you had a proper night's sleep?" Sarah couldn't remember. Her days blurred together in an endless cycle of cooking, cleaning, mending, washing, and trying to keep their small ranch running while caring for Tommy, who was 12, Emma, who was 9, little Caleb, who was 6, and baby Rose, who had just turned 3. She worked from before dawn until long after dark, and still it never seemed to be enough. The vegetable garden was overrun with weeds, the chicken coop needed repairs, the barn roof leaked, and they were nearly out of everything. "I'll manage," Sarah said, bending to retrieve the flour sack even as black spots danced at the edges of her vision. She had to manage. There was no other choice. "Let me get that for you." A deep voice, warm as honey and touched with a slight Texas drawl, came from behind her. Strong hands lifted the flour sack before she could protest, and Sarah turned to find herself looking up into the kindest pair of brown eyes she'd ever seen. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly beneath his worn Stetson. He couldn't have been more than 25 or 26, and something in his expression, a gentleness that sat strangely at odds with his rough cowboy appearance, made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jacob Turner, ma'am." He tipped his hat respectfully, still holding the flour sack as if it weighed nothing. "I'm the new foreman out at the Double R Ranch, just came into town for supplies. Sarah Mitchell." She tucked a strand of dark hair that had escaped her bun behind her ear, suddenly acutely aware of how disheveled she must look. Her dress was worn and patched, her hands were rough from work, and she probably had flour dust on her face now too. "Miss Mitchell runs the old Mitchell place north of town," Mr. Henderson supplied, "all by herself now with 4 little ones to care for." Sarah wished the floor would open up and swallow her. The last thing she needed was the pity of a handsome stranger. "I should be getting back," she said, reaching for the flour sack. But Jacob Turner didn't hand it over. Instead, he studied her face with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Forgive me for being forward, Miss Mitchell, but you look like you're about to collapse. Why don't you let me help you load your supplies into your wagon?" "That's not necessary." Pride stiffened Sarah's spine even as her body screamed for rest. "I can manage just fine on my own." "I don't doubt that you can," Jacob said softly, "but that doesn't mean you should have to." Something in his tone, a deep understanding that went beyond mere politeness, made Sarah's carefully constructed walls crack just a fraction. She was so tired of being strong, so tired of carrying everything alone. "All right," she heard herself say. "Thank you." As Jacob helped her gather the rest of her supplies, which were pitifully few given how little money she had left, Sarah found herself stealing glances at him. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, but there was nothing arrogant about him. When he asked questions about her ranch and her siblings, his interest seemed genuine, and he listened to her answers with his full attention. "Tommy tries to help when he can," Sarah found herself explaining as they walked out to her wagon, "but he's only 12 and he has his schooling to think about. I won't let him give that up, no matter how hard things get. Mama and Papa would have wanted him to finish school." "That's admirable," Jacob said, loading the supplies into the wagon bed with care. "Education's important. My own mama felt the same way. She taught me to read and write even when we had nothing but a dirt floor and a leaky roof over our heads down in Texas. Is that where you're from? Sarah asked, curious despite herself. Born and raised in the hill country outside San Antonio. Left home when I was 17 to make my own way. Been working ranches all over the West ever since. Jacob secured the last of the supplies and turned to face her. Miss Mitchell, I hope this doesn't sound too forward, but I'd like to come by your place tomorrow if you'd allow it. Take a look around, see if there's anything that needs fixing. Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. She'd learned the hard way that accepting help always came with strings attached, with expectations and obligations she couldn't afford. But when she looked into Jacob Turner's steady brown eyes, she saw only honest concern, no hidden agenda or ulterior motive. Why would you want to do that? The question came out sharper than she intended, years of wariness making her defensive. Jacob didn't flinch. Because I know what it's like to be alone and struggling, and because someone helped me once when I needed it most. A rancher up in Wyoming took me on when I was barely more than a boy, taught me everything about working cattle, treated me like family. He told me that kindness is meant to be passed along, not hoarded. He paused, then added quietly, and because I can see that you're running yourself into the ground trying to do everything alone, and that's no good for you or those children depending on you. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She couldn't afford to break down, not here in the middle of town where everyone would see. I don't have money to pay you, she said, the admission burning her throat. I'm not asking for money, I'm asking for a chance to help. Jacob's voice was gentle but firm. Please, Miss Mitchell. Let me come by tomorrow. Sarah knew she should say no. She should thank him politely and send him on his way. But exhaustion and desperation were powerful forces, and the thought of having anyone, help shoulder even a small portion of her crushing burden was almost unbearably tempting. All right, she whispered. Tomorrow afternoon after lunch. The smile that broke across Jacob Turner's face was like sunrise, warm and bright and full of promise. I'll be there, he said, helping her up onto the wagon seat with a steadying hand. You drive careful now, Miss Mitchell. As Sarah guided the wagon back toward home, her mind was a whirl of confusion. She told herself not to get her hopes up, that Jacob Turner was probably just being polite and wouldn't actually show up tomorrow. Men made promises all the time that they didn't keep. But something in his eyes, a depth of sincerity she couldn't quite dismiss, made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was different. The Mitchell homestead looked even more rundown than usual as Sarah pulled the wagon up to the small house. The fence was sagging, the porch steps needed replacing, and the barn door hung crooked on its hinges. Sarah felt a familiar wave of shame wash over her. This wasn't how Mama and Papa had kept the place. They would be heartbroken to see how it had deteriorated under her care. Sarah's home. Emma's voice rang out, and suddenly all 4 children came tumbling out of the house in a chaos of noise and motion. Emma's braids were coming undone. Caleb had dirt smudged across his cheek. Tommy looked harried and exhausted, and little Rose was crying, her face red and tear-streaked. She won't stop crying, Tommy said, frustration clear in his voice. I tried everything, Sarah, I swear I did, but nothing works. Sarah climbed down from the wagon, her legs trembling with fatigue, and scooped Rose into her arms. The little girl immediately buried her face in Sarah's neck, her sobs subsiding to hiccuping whimpers. It's all right, sweetheart, I'm here now. I'm hungry, Caleb announced. Tommy made lunch, but it was gross. It was not gross, Tommy shot back, his face flushing. I did the best I could. Maybe if you weren't such a baby about eating vegetables. I'm not a baby. Both of you, that's enough, Sarah said, trying to inject some authority into her voice even though all she wanted to do was lie down and sleep for a week. Tommy, thank you for watching them and making lunch. I know it's hard. Emma, why don't you help me get Rose calmed down while the boys unload the wagon? But that's heavy work, Caleb protested. Then it's a good thing you're such a strong, brave boy, Sarah said, managing a smile she didn't feel. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Sarah nursed Rose until she fell asleep for her nap, then started on the mountain of mending that had piled up. Emma sat beside her, trying to help but mostly just tangling the thread. Through the window, Sarah could see Tommy and Caleb in the yard, arguing over the proper way to stack firewood. Everything felt like it was held together with spit and prayers, like one strong wind would blow their whole fragile existence apart. That night, after the children were finally asleep, Sarah sat at the kitchen table and tried to make their accounts balance. No matter how many times she added the numbers, the result was the same. They were nearly out of money, and she had no idea how they were going to make it through the winter. The small amount of money her parents had saved was almost gone, eaten up by basic necessities and the children's needs. She could sell the ranch, she supposed. Someone might buy it, though the place was so run down now that it wouldn't fetch much. But then what? Where would they go? How would she support 4 children with no home and no resources? The thought of splitting them up, of sending them to different families who might take them in, made her feel physically ill. They'd lost so much already. She couldn't let them lose each other too. Sarah rested her head on her folded arms and allowed herself, just for a moment, to imagine what it would be like if Jacob Turner really did show up tomorrow. If he really did help. If she didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. The fantasy was so sweet it hurt. The next day dawned hot and bright, and Sarah threw herself into work with even more determination than usual. She told herself she wasn't preparing for Jacob's visit, that she was just doing what needed to be done anyway. But she found herself sweeping the porch that didn't really need sweeping and changing into her better dress, the blue calico one that was only a little faded. "Why are you wearing that dress?" Emma asked, her sharp 9-year-old eyes missing nothing. "Is someone coming over?" "Maybe," Sarah admitted, scrubbing potatoes for lunch with more vigor than necessary. "A man I met in town said he might stop by." "What kind of man?" Tommy asked, instantly suspicious. At 12, he'd appointed himself the man of the house, and he took his responsibility seriously. "A cowboy from the Double R Ranch. His name is Jacob Turner, and he offered to help with some repairs around the place." Sarah kept her voice casual, not wanting to make too big a deal of it in case Jacob didn't show up after all. But right after lunch, as Sarah was wiping Rose's face clean of potato, the sound of hoofbeats announced a visitor. Sarah's heart kicked against her ribs as she looked out the window and saw Jacob Turner riding up on a sturdy bay horse, his hat pulled low against the sun. "He's here," Emma breathed, pressing her nose to the window glass. "He's really handsome, Sarah." "Emma," Sarah's face flamed. "That's not appropriate." But as she stepped out onto the porch, smoothing her dress with nervous hands, Sarah couldn't help but agree with her sister's assessment. Jacob Turner looked even better than she remembered, tall and solid and capable in a way that made something tight in Sarah's chest loosen just a fraction. "Miss Mitchell," Jacob said, dismounting with easy grace. He removed his hat, and Sarah saw that his dark hair was slightly damp with sweat. "Hope I'm not too early." "Right on time," Sarah managed. "Thank you for coming. I'll admit I wasn't entirely sure you would." Something flickered across Jacob's face, an old hurt quickly masked. "When I give my word, ma'am, I keep it." Sarah felt ashamed of her doubt. "I'm sorry." "I didn't mean to imply otherwise. It's just that people often say things they don't mean." "I understand," Jacob said simply. "You've got no reason to trust me yet. That's fair enough." The children had all followed Sarah onto the porch, forming a protective wall behind her. Jacob's eyes moved over them with interest, and his expression softened. "These must be your siblings. You want to introduce me?" Sarah gestured to each child in turn. "This is Tommy, Emma, Caleb, and Rose." Rose, typically shy with strangers, was peeking out from behind Sarah's skirts. "Children, this is Mr. Turner. He's offered to help us with some repairs around the ranch." "Why?" Tommy asked bluntly, his arms crossed over his thin chest. "What do you want in return?" "Tommy," Sarah gasped, mortified, but Jacob just smiled. "That's a fair question, son." Shows you're smart and looking out for your family." He crouched down so he was closer to Tommy's eye level. "The truth is, I don't want anything in return except maybe a glass of water and the satisfaction of knowing I helped folks who needed it. I've been in tight spots myself, and I know how much it can mean when someone extends a hand." Tommy studied Jacob with narrowed eyes, clearly trying to decide if he was trustworthy. After a long moment, he gave a small nod. "All right. But if you try anything funny, I've got Papa's rifle and I know how to use it." "Tommy!" Sarah was horrified, but Jacob just laughed, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to ripple through the hot afternoon air. "I'd expect nothing less," he said, standing and ruffling Tommy's hair. The boy scowled but didn't pull away. "Now, why don't you show me around and tell me what needs the most attention?" Over the next several hours, Jacob worked with a quiet efficiency that left Sarah amazed. He repaired the sagging fence, fixed the barn door, and patched the leaky roof with materials he'd brought with him. Tommy followed him around like a shadow, watching his every move with intense concentration, and Jacob patiently explained what he was doing and why, treating the boy like a capable assistant rather than a nuisance. Sarah brought out water and leftover biscuits, and Jacob took a break in the shade of the porch, wiping sweat from his brow. Emma and Caleb had lost their initial shyness and were peppering him with questions about horses and cattle and what it was like being a cowboy. "You got a gun?" Caleb asked, his eyes wide with excitement. "I do," Jacob said, "but it's not something I use unless I absolutely have to. Guns are tools, not toys, and they're serious business. A smart man finds ways to solve problems without violence when he can." "Papa said the same thing," Tommy said quietly, and Sarah saw the flash of grief cross his young face. "He said a real man uses his head before he uses his fists or his gun." "Your papa sounds like he was a wise man," Jacob said gently. "You must miss him something fierce." "Every day," Tommy whispered, and Sarah felt tears burn her eyes. She turned away, not wanting the children to see her cry. They needed her to be strong. But Jacob must have noticed, because a moment later he stood up, stretched, and announced, "Well, I'd better get back to work before it gets too late. Tommy, you want to come help me with the chicken coop? I noticed it could use some reinforcing." As the afternoon wore into evening, Sarah found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. There was something deeply comforting about having another adult there, someone competent and capable who could shoulder some of the burden. She watched Jacob work, noting the careful precision of his movements, the way he never got frustrated or impatient even when something didn't go quite right. When the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jacob finally packed up his tools. "I'll need to head back to the Double R soon," he said, "but I can come again tomorrow if you'd like. There's still plenty that needs doing." "Mr. Turner, I can't ask you to give up your free time," Sarah began, but Jacob held up a hand. "You're not asking, I'm offering, and please call me Jacob." "Mr. Turner makes me feel like my grandfather," he smiled, and Sarah felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. "Only if you call me Sarah," she heard herself say. "Sarah." Her name sounded different in his mouth, softer somehow, more precious. "I'll be back tomorrow then, if that's all right." "Yes," Sarah said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "Yes, that would be very all right." As Jacob mounted his horse and rode away, Emma sidled up next to Sarah and slipped her small hand into her sister's. "I like him," she announced. "He's nice, and he didn't get mad even when Caleb asked him a million questions." "I like him too," Sarah admitted softly, watching until Jacob disappeared over the rise. For the first time in 8 long months, she felt something that might have been hope. True to his word, Jacob returned the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. He came every afternoon after finishing his work at the Double R Ranch, and he threw himself into fixing up the Mitchell homestead with an enthusiasm that took Sarah's breath away. He mended the porch steps, repaired the chicken coop, weeded the vegetable garden, and fixed a dozen other things that Sarah hadn't even realized were broken until he pointed them out. But more than the physical labor, Jacob brought something else to their home: laughter. He teased Emma out of her worried moods, challenged Tommy to foot races that he sometimes let the boy win, gave Caleb horseback rides around the yard, and had infinite patience for little Rose, who had taken to following him around and chattering at him in her limited vocabulary. And with Sarah, Jacob was unfailingly gentle, respectful, and kind. He never pushed, never demanded, never made her feel inadequate for the things she couldn't do alone. Instead, he worked alongside her, his presence steady and calming, and slowly, carefully, he began to draw her out. They talked while they worked, sharing stories of their pasts. Jacob told her about growing up poor in Texas, about losing his father to a horse accident when he was just 10, about his mother's struggle to keep food on the table. "She was the strongest person I ever knew," he said one afternoon as they weeded the garden together, their hands moving in rhythm. "She worked herself to the bone for me and my sisters, never complained, never gave up. I think that's why I can't just ride past someone who's struggling. I see her in them." "Where is she now?" Sarah asked, carefully pulling up a stubborn thistle. "She passed on about 5 years ago. Pneumonia took her one bad winter." Jacob's voice was thick with old grief. "I was working a ranch up in Colorado at the time. By the time I got the telegram and made it home, she was already gone. My sisters had already married and moved away, started their own families. I sold the little house we'd lived in and just started drifting, I suppose. Working one ranch after another, never staying anywhere too long." "That sounds lonely," Sarah said softly. Jacob looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "It was, but I'm starting to think maybe I was drifting towards something rather than just away. Maybe I needed to end up here in Montana at this exact time." Sarah knew what he meant without him having to spell it out. The air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken feelings that neither was quite ready to name. "I'm glad you did," she whispered. "End up here, I mean." Over the following weeks, Jacob became a fixture in their lives. He taught Tommy how to properly care for the horses and repair tack, skills the boy soaked up like a sponge. He helped Emma with her reading, praising her progress with genuine enthusiasm. He carved little wooden animals for Caleb, who lined them up on his windowsill like treasures. And he held Rose when she was fussy, walking her around the yard and singing old cowboy songs in his deep, rumbling voice until she fell asleep on his shoulder. Sarah found herself watching him more and more, noticing little things. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the gentleness of his big hands when he handled something delicate, the sound of his laughter rolling across the yard. She noticed how hard he worked, never complaining even when he had to be exhausted from putting in a full day at the Double R before coming to help her. She noticed how patient he was with the children, how he never talked down to them or dismissed their concerns as unimportant. And she noticed the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't paying attention. There was something in his eyes that made her feel warm and fluttery and nervous all at once, something that spoke of feelings deeper than simple friendship or neighborly kindness. One evening, after the children were in bed, Jacob lingered on the porch instead of heading straight home. The summer night was pleasant, crickets singing in the grass, and Sarah brought out 2 cups of the precious coffee she'd been hoarding. "You don't have to waste your coffee on me," Jacob protested, but he accepted the cup with a grateful smile. "It's not a waste," Sarah said, settling into the rocking chair while Jacob leaned against the porch railing. "You've done so much for us. It's the least I can offer." "Sarah, I need to talk to you about something." Jacob's voice was serious, and Sarah felt her stomach clench with anxiety. This was it, she thought. He was going to tell her he couldn't keep coming around anymore, that it was too much, that she needed to figure things out on her own. "All right," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Jacob set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. In the dim light from the window, his face was all plains and shadows, impossibly handsome and impossibly dear. "These past few weeks, coming here, helping you and the children, it's meant more to me than I think you realize. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm part of something, like I have a purpose beyond just earning my next paycheck." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "We've loved having you here. The children adore you and she stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. "And you," Jacob prompted gently, taking a step closer. Sarah stood up, her legs unsteady. "And I've come to depend on you, maybe more than I should. You've given us so much, Jacob, not just your labor and your help, but your time and your patience and your kindness. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "I don't want repayment," Jacob said, and now he was standing right in front of her, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Sarah, I think you must know by now that I haven't been coming here just out of the goodness of my heart. I mean, I do want to help, but there's more to it than that." "What do you mean?" Sarah whispered, though she thought she knew, hoped she knew. Jacob reached out and gently cupped her face in his calloused palm. The touch was so tender it made Sarah's eyes sting with tears. "I mean that I've fallen in love with you," he said simply. "With you and with those children. Somewhere between fixing fences and weeding gardens and listening to Rose's nonsense stories, you all worked your way into my heart, and now I can't imagine my life without you in it." Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw honesty and vulnerability. "Jacob, let me finish," he said, his thumb stroking across her cheekbone. "I know you're exhausted, Sarah. I can see it in your eyes, in the way your hands shake sometimes, in how you push yourself past the point where most people would collapse. You're trying to be everything to those kids, and you're doing an amazing job, but you're running yourself into the ground doing it. And I can't stand by and watch that happen." Tears were sliding down Sarah's face now, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. "What are you saying?" Jacob took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was shaking slightly with emotion. "I'm saying let me help you raise them. Not as a hired hand or a neighbor doing charity work, but as a partner, as a husband. Marry me, Sarah. Let me stand beside you and help shoulder this burden. Let me be a father to Tommy and Emma and Caleb and Rose. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved." Sarah's mind was reeling. Marriage. He was proposing marriage. Part of her wanted to throw her arms around him and say yes immediately, to grab onto this lifeline with both hands. But another part, the part that had been hurt and disappointed too many times, held her back. "Jacob, you can't possibly know that you want this," she said, forcing the words past the lump in her throat. "You've only known us for a few weeks. Marriage is serious, and taking on 4 children who aren't your own, that's a huge responsibility. What if you regret it? What if you wake up one day and resent us for tying you down?" "I won't," Jacob said with absolute certainty. "Sarah, I'm 26 years old. I've been on my own since I was 17. I've drifted from place to place, never putting down roots, never letting myself get attached to anything or anyone. I've been lonely for so long I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to not be lonely. And then I met you and everything changed." He took both her hands in his, holding them like they were something precious and fragile. "When I'm here with you and the children, I feel whole in a way I never have before. I look at Tommy and I see a boy who needs a man to guide him, to teach him, to show him how to be strong and kind. I look at Emma and Caleb and Rose and I see children who need stability and love and someone who will always be there for them. And when I look at you," his voice broke, and he had to pause before continuing. "When I look at you, Sarah Mitchell, I see the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. I see a partner, a helpmeet, someone whose strength matches my own. I see the future I never knew I was looking for." Sarah was sobbing now, unable to hold back the flood of emotion. "I'm not strong," she choked out. "I'm barely holding it together. I'm failing them, Jacob. The ranch is falling apart, we're almost out of money, and I don't know how I'm going to feed them through the winter. I'm not the strong woman you think I am." "Yes, you are," Jacob said fiercely, pulling her against his chest and wrapping his arms around her. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met, and the fact that you're scared and uncertain doesn't change that. Strength isn't about never being afraid or never needing help. It's about keeping going even when you're terrified, even when you don't think you can take another step. And that's exactly what you've been doing. Sarah clung to him, breathing in the scent of him, leather and sweat and something indefinably masculine that made her feel safe for the first time in months. "I'm so tired," she whispered against his chest. "I'm so tired of being scared and alone." "Then don't be alone anymore." Jacob pulled back just enough to look down at her, his brown eyes blazing with intensity. "Let me in, Sarah. Let me help. Say you'll marry me." Sarah looked up at this man who had appeared in her life like an answered prayer, this gentle cowboy with his kind eyes and big heart. She thought about how good he was with the children, how hard he worked, how he never asked for anything in return. She thought about how her heart lifted every time she saw him riding up to the house, how empty the place felt when he wasn't there. She thought about Tommy's hero worship, Emma's giggles, Caleb's excitement, and Rose's complete adoration. And she thought about herself, about the way Jacob made her feel seen and valued and cherished in a way she'd never experienced before. About how she'd already fallen in love with him, probably from that very first day in the mercantile when he'd picked up her flour sack and looked at her with such understanding. "Yes," she breathed, the word coming out as a sob and a laugh all at once. "Yes, I'll marry you, Jacob Turner." The smile that broke across Jacob's face was incandescent. He cupped her face in both hands and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Sarah melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for a long, perfect moment the rest of the world fell away. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you won't regret this," he murmured. "I'm going to spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you and those children are happy and cared for." "I know you will," Sarah whispered, and she believed it with her whole heart. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in town. Sarah wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Emma and Caleb had picked. Tommy stood beside Jacob as his best man, looking proud and grown up in his Sunday clothes, while Emma served as Sarah's maid of honor, beaming with joy. Rose, clutching her new wooden doll that Jacob had carved for her, kept calling out "Papa." During the ceremony, which made the small congregation laugh, but Jacob didn't mind. He just smiled and waved at her, and Sarah felt her heart overflow with love. After the ceremony, they had a simple celebration at the ranch. Some of the neighbors brought food and Mr. Henderson from the mercantile gave them a beautiful quilt as a wedding gift. The foreman from the Double R Ranch, a gruff older man named Walt, clapped Jacob on the shoulder and told him he was a lucky man. "Don't I know it?" Jacob said, his eyes finding Sarah across the yard where she was serving cake to the children. As the sun set and the guests departed, Jacob and Sarah stood together on the porch of what was now their home, watching the children play in the yard. Tommy was teaching Caleb how to throw a rope, Emma was braiding wildflowers into a crown, and Rose was toddling around picking dandelions. "Are you happy?" Jacob asked, slipping his arm around Sarah's waist and pulling her close. Sarah leaned into his solid warmth and smiled. "Happier than I ever thought possible. Are you sure you're ready for this? 4 instant children is a lot to take on." "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," Jacob said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We're a family now, Sarah, you and me and those 4 beautiful children. And I'm going to spend every day proving to you that you made the right choice." That night, after the children were tucked into bed and the house was finally quiet, Jacob and Sarah sat together on the porch, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. The Montana sky was brilliant with stars, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage and grass. "I was thinking," Jacob said quietly, "about the ranch. I've got some money saved up, and with my salary from the Double R, we should be able to get by reasonably well. But I was also thinking maybe we could expand the cattle operation here, start building up our own herd. Tommy's getting old enough to help with real ranch work, and in a few years, Caleb will be too. We could make this place really thrive." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were happy tears. "You're really in this for the long haul, aren't you?" "Forever," Jacob said simply. "However long forever turns out to be, that's how long I'm in this." The months that followed were some of the happiest of Sarah's life. True to his word, Jacob threw himself into both caring for the family and building up the ranch. He was an excellent cattleman, and under his guidance, the Mitchell Ranch began to recover and then thrive. He bought a small herd of cattle using his savings, and slowly but surely they built up a respectable operation. But more than the financial security, Jacob brought stability and joy to their lives. He was patient with the children's mistakes, firm but fair with discipline, and generous with affection. Tommy blossomed under his guidance, growing in confidence and skill. Emma's anxious worry lines smoothed away. Caleb laughed more than he had since their parents died. And Rose started calling Jacob Papa all the time, forgetting she'd ever had another father. That worried Sarah sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep. "Is it wrong that she doesn't remember our real parents?" she asked Jacob one night as they lay in bed, his arms around her. "Emma and Caleb's memories are fading too. Sometimes I feel like I'm letting Mama and Papa down by letting them forget." Jacob held her tighter. "You're not letting anyone down, sweetheart. Your parents wouldn't want those children to be sad forever. They'd want them to be happy and loved and secure, and that's exactly what they are." He paused, then added, "Besides, you keep their memory alive by telling stories about them, by teaching the children the values they held dear. That's what really matters." Sarah knew he was right. She did tell the children stories about their parents, about their father's gentle humor and their mother's fierce love. And she taught them the things her parents had taught her. The importance of hard work, of honesty, of treating others with kindness and respect. As that first winter approached, Sarah realized with amazement that she wasn't afraid. The barn was stocked with hay, the pantry was full, and they had money in the bank for the first time in years. More importantly, she wasn't alone anymore. She had Jacob, solid and steady and endlessly capable. Sharing her burdens and her joys on Christmas morning, Sarah woke to find the house already warm, Jacob having risen early to stoke the fire. She came downstairs to find him making breakfast while the children tore into the small presents he'd insisted on buying despite her protests that they couldn't afford it. "Jacob, this is too much," she said, watching Emma squeal over a new doll and Caleb whoop with joy over a toy horse. "It's not nearly enough," Jacob said, pulling her into his arms and kissing her soundly. "I want to give you the world, Sarah Turner, Sarah Turner." She still got a little thrill every time she heard her new name. "You already have," she whispered against his lips. "You gave me a partner, a helpmate, someone to share my life with. You gave my siblings a father who loves them. You gave us all a future when I couldn't see how we'd survive another month." "We gave that to each other," Jacob corrected gently. "You let me in when you could have turned me away. You trusted me with your heart and your family. That's the greatest gift anyone's ever given me." As winter gave way to spring, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She was nervous about telling Jacob, worried that he might feel overwhelmed by the thought of another child when they already had 4. But when she finally worked up the courage to share the news, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for: a baby. His face lit up like the sun breaking through clouds. "We're having a baby." "Yes," Sarah said, laughing through sudden tears. "Are you happy?" "I know we already have our hands full." Jacob swept her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen. "Happy? Sarah, I'm over the moon. A baby that's ours, that we made together. It's perfect. You're perfect." The children were equally thrilled when they told them. Emma immediately started planning everything they'd need for the baby. Tommy declared he'd teach his new sibling to ride as soon as they were old enough. Caleb wanted to know if it would be a boy or a girl. And Rose, not entirely understanding but caught up in the excitement, kept patting Sarah's still flat stomach and saying, "Baby, baby." That autumn, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Daniel Jacob Turner, and from the moment he entered the world, he was surrounded by love. Tommy held him with infinite care, marveling at how tiny he was. Emma sang to him when he cried. Caleb brought him his favorite wooden horse to look at. And Rose, now 4 years old, appointed herself his special protector. Jacob was utterly besotted with his son, but he was careful to give equal attention to all the children. He made sure Tommy and Caleb never felt displaced, that Emma knew she was still his special girl, that Rose understood she was still his baby even though there was a new baby in the house. "You're so good at this," Sarah told him one evening as she watched him rock Daniel to sleep while simultaneously helping Caleb with his letters and listening to Emma read aloud. "How do you make it look so easy?" "It's not easy," Jacob admitted with a grin, "but it's the best kind of hard. The kind that matters." The years rolled on, bringing both joys and challenges. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Elizabeth when Daniel was 2, and another son named James when Elizabeth was 3. The ranch continued to prosper under Jacob's management, and they were eventually able to hire a couple of hands to help with the work. Tommy grew into a fine young man, tall and capable, every inch the rancher Jacob had trained him to be. When he turned 18, Jacob made him a full partner in the ranch, much to Tommy's shock and delight. "This is your family's land," Jacob told him. "Your parents built this place with their blood and sweat. You deserve to have a stake in it." Emma became the town schoolteacher, following in their mother's footsteps, though she still lived at home. She had inherited Sarah's nurturing nature and their mother's love of learning. Caleb showed an aptitude for working with horses that surpassed even Jacob's, and by the time he was 16, people were coming from all over Montana to buy horses he'd trained. And Rose, sweet Rose, grew into a lively, joyful young girl who could rope a calf as well as any boy and wasn't afraid of anything. She had completely forgotten the tragedy of her early years, knowing only the happy, secure life Jacob had helped build for her. One spring evening, 15 years after that fateful day in the mercantile, Sarah and Jacob sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Inside, they could hear the chaos of family life. Daniel arguing with James about something, Elizabeth singing as she helped with the dishes, Tommy and Caleb discussing the next day's work, Emma reading aloud to Rose. "You ever regret it?" Sarah asked, lacing her fingers through Jacob's. "Taking on such a huge responsibility," Jacob looked at her, his brown eyes still as warm and kind as they'd been that first day. His hair had some silver in it now, and there were lines around his eyes, but to Sarah, he was more handsome than ever. "Not for a single second," he said firmly. "Sarah, you and these children are the best thing that ever happened to me. Before I met you, I was just drifting through life with no real purpose, no real home. You gave me all of that. You gave me a family, a place to belong, a reason to get up every morning. If anything, I'm the one who should be asking if you regret taking a chance on a broke cowboy who showed up offering to fix your fences." Sarah laughed, the sound rich and full of joy. "Never, not once. You saved us, Jacob. You saved me when I was drowning. You gave my siblings stability and love and a father when they desperately needed one. And you gave me a partnership, a real marriage built on respect and friendship and love." She paused, then added softly, "You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have." Jacob pulled her close, kissing her temple. "We gave it to each other," he murmured, echoing what he'd said all those years ago on their first Christmas together. "That's what marriage is, sweetheart. 2 people choosing each other every single day, sharing the burdens and multiplying the joys." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah rested her head on Jacob's shoulder and thought about how far they'd come. From that day in the mercantile when she'd been at the end of her rope, exhausted and desperate and alone, to this moment surrounded by the life they'd built together. 7 children, a thriving ranch, a community that respected them, and most importantly, a love that had only grown deeper and stronger with each passing year. Tommy came out onto the porch, now a man of 27 with a sweetheart in town he was courting. "Papa, I'm heading over to the Hendersons' place. I'll be back before dark." "Tell Mary we said hello," Sarah called after him, and Tommy grinned, his ears turning red. "Will do, Mama, Mama." Sarah's heart still swelled every time one of the children called her that. She was their sister, yes, but she was also their mother in every way that counted. And Jacob was their father, the man who had chosen to love them, who had raised them as his own, who had never once treated them as anything less than his children. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob asked, reading her expression the way he always could. "Just how grateful I am," Sarah said simply, "for all of this, for you, for the life we've built, for every single moment." "Me too," Jacob said, his arm tightening around her. "Every single day, I thank God for that afternoon in the mercantile when I saw a beautiful, exhausted woman drop a flour sack, and something in my heart said she's the one." "You really thought that?" Sarah asked, looking up at him in surprise. "I really did," Jacob confirmed. "Call it instinct or fate or divine intervention, but I knew from that very first moment that you were going to change my life. I just had no idea how much, or how wonderfully." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of their children and the peaceful evening settling over the ranch. The land stretched out before them, green and lush and prosperous, a testament to their hard work and determination. "We should probably go in," Sarah said eventually. "James will need to be put to bed soon, and Elizabeth promised to make cobbler for dessert." "In a minute," Jacob said, pulling her closer. "I just want to sit here with my wife for a little longer and count my blessings." Sarah smiled and snuggled into his warmth. This was what happiness felt like, she thought. Not the absence of hardship or challenge, but the presence of love and support and partnership. It was knowing that whatever life threw at them, they would face it together. It was watching their children grow and thrive. It was sitting on a porch in the fading light with the man she loved more than anything, feeling completely and utterly at peace. "I love you, Jacob Turner," she whispered. "I love you too, Sarah Turner," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "More than words could ever express. You and these children, this life we've built, it's everything I never knew I needed." Inside, Elizabeth called out that the cobbler was ready, and Rose came running out to fetch them. "Mama, Papa, come on, it's getting cold." Jacob stood and extended his hand to Sarah, pulling her to her feet. "Come on, Mrs. Turner, our family awaits." Hand in hand, they walked into the warm, bright house filled with love and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family life. Behind them, the Montana sky deepened to indigo, and the first stars of evening began to shine like promises kept. The Mitchell Ranch, once a place of struggle and despair, had been transformed into a home full of life and love. And at the center of it all were Sarah and Jacob, the exhausted woman who had been drowning under the weight of responsibility, and the cowboy who had said, "Let me help raise them with you." And in doing so, had given them all a future more beautiful than they could have imagined. Their story became something of a legend in their small Montana town. People spoke of the Turner family with respect and admiration, pointing to them as an example of what could be accomplished through hard work, determination, and above all, love. Young couples starting out would seek advice from Sarah and Jacob, wanting to know the secret to their obviously happy marriage. "There's no secret," Jacob would always say. "You just have to choose each other every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And you have to be willing to accept help when you need it," Sarah would add, smiling at her husband. "Pride can be a dangerous thing. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you can't do it alone." As their children grew and began to establish lives of their own, the ranch house remained the center of family gatherings. Tommy married his sweetheart Mary and built a house on the far edge of the property. And soon Sarah and Jacob were grandparents to Tommy and Mary's daughter. Emma eventually married the new schoolmaster who came to town, a kind man named Peter who appreciated her intelligence and gentle nature. Caleb started his own horse ranch, partnering with his brother Daniel when Daniel came of age. Rose, ever the adventurous one, talked about traveling east to see the big cities. But she always came home to the ranch, unable to stay away from the family that meant everything to her. She eventually married a rancher from a neighboring property, a young man who had loved her since they were children. James and Elizabeth, the babies who had come along after Sarah and Jacob's marriage, grew up knowing nothing but stability and love. They had no memory of the hardship and struggle that had preceded their births, but they heard the stories and understood how precious their family truly was. On Sarah and Jacob's 20th wedding anniversary, all the children, those biological and those adopted by marriage, gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was overflowing with people, noise, and love. Grandchildren ran through the yard, shrieking with laughter. The adults gathered on the porch, sharing food and stories and memories. As the sun set on that perfect day, Sarah found herself once again on the porch with Jacob, surveying the beautiful chaos of their large, loving family. 20 years, she marveled. It seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Best 20 years of my life, Jacob said, pressing a kiss to her graying hair. And I'm looking forward to the next 20 and the 20 after that if we're blessed to have them. What would you tell that exhausted, scared girl who was ready to collapse in the mercantile that day? Sarah asked. If you could go back and talk to her, what would you say? Jacob considered for a moment. I'd tell her that she's stronger than she knows, braver than she believes, and that she's about to meet a cowboy who's going to love her for the rest of his life. I'd tell her that all the struggle and pain is leading somewhere beautiful, and that she should hold on just a little bit longer because help is coming. And what would you tell that young cowboy who was drifting from place to place with no real home? Sarah asked. I'd tell him that his wandering is about to end in the best possible way. That he's about to find not just a home, but a family, not just a wife, but a true partner. I'd tell him that the lonely years were just preparing him for the fullness that was coming. Jacob turned to look at her, his eyes shining with emotion. I'd tell him that choosing to help that day in the mercantile would be the best decision he ever made. Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. We were so lucky to find each other. Luck had nothing to do with it, Jacob said softly. It was grace, pure and simple. The grace that brings two broken people together and allows them to heal each other and build something beautiful from the broken pieces. Their eldest grandson came running up to the porch, tugging on Jacob's sleeve. Grandpa, will you tell us the story again about how you and Grandma met? Jacob laughed and scooped the boy up. Again, I just told it last week. But I like hearing it, the boy insisted. It's romantic. Like in Mama's books. Soon all the grandchildren had gathered around, and even the adult children paused their conversations to listen as Jacob told the story once more. He told it well, making it funny and sweet and perfect, and Sarah watched his face as he spoke, loving him more with each passing year. When he got to the part about proposing, about saying, "Let me help raise them with you, little Elizabeth," their youngest, who was now a young woman of 15, sighed dramatically. That's the most romantic thing I've ever heard. It wasn't romance, Jacob said gently. Not entirely, anyway. It was practicality and compassion and a genuine desire to help. The romance came later, growing slowly out of shared work and mutual respect and genuine friendship. That's the best kind of love, the kind that's built on a solid foundation. Your grandfather is right, Sarah added. Love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice you make every single day. It's choosing to be patient when you're frustrated, choosing to be kind when you're tired, choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. True love is built in the small, everyday moments, not just the grand, romantic gestures. As the evening wore on and the family gradually dispersed to their respective homes, Sarah and Jacob remained on the porch, reluctant to let the perfect day end. The ranch was quiet now, peaceful in the way only a well-loved home can be. You think we did right by them? Sarah asked quietly. The children, I mean. Do you think they're happy? Jacob didn't answer immediately, taking the time to really consider the question. Finally, he said, I think they're as happy as any people can be in this imperfect world. They know they're loved, they have strong values, they're capable and confident. Most importantly, they know what a healthy, loving relationship looks like because they watched us build one. That's one of the best gifts we could give them. You're right, Sarah agreed. And I suppose we can't protect them from everything. Life will bring its share of sorrows and struggles, but they'll face those challenges with the strength we helped build in them. And they'll face them together, as a family, Jacob added. That's what we've given them more than anything, a sense of belonging, of tribe. They'll always have each other. As they prepared for bed that night, Sarah caught sight of herself in the mirror. She was 42 years old now, her dark hair liberally streaked with gray, her face lined with the marks of a life fully lived. She looked so different from the exhausted, desperate young woman she'd been 20 years ago. What are you thinking? Jacob asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Just that I'm not the same person I was when we met, Sarah said. I've changed so much. We've both changed, Jacob agreed. That's what life does to you, especially a life lived fully and with intention. But you're still you, Sarah. Still strong, still compassionate, still the woman I fell in love with. Just better, more complete. Sarah turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had been her partner, her helpmate, her love for 20 years. I never imagined I could be this happy, she confessed. When Mama and Papa died, I thought my life was essentially over. I thought I'd just survive, just exist, getting through each day for the sake of the children. I never dreamed I could have this, a real marriage, more children, a thriving ranch, a full and joyful life. That's the thing about grace, Jacob said, echoing his earlier words. It gives us things we could never imagine for ourselves. It takes our broken pieces and creates something beautiful. He kissed her softly. I love you, Sarah Turner, today, tomorrow, and forever. Forever, Sarah agreed, her heart full to overflowing, however long forever turns out to be. And as they settled into bed, wrapped in each other's arms, Sarah sent up a silent prayer of thanksgiving for the cowboy who had walked into her life when she needed him most, who had said, "Let me help raise them with you," and who had kept that promise every single day since. Their love story, born of desperation and kindness, had bloomed into something truly extraordinary, a testament to the power of choosing love, choosing partnership, choosing to face life's challenges together. The Montana night settled over the ranch, peaceful and star-studded, and in the warm house, Sarah and Jacob slept the contented sleep of people who knew they were exactly where they belonged, with exactly who they belonged with. Their story wasn't just about survival or even success. It was about transformation, about two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and built a life more beautiful than either had dreamed possible. It was a love story for the ages, played out in the ordinary moments of daily life, and it was perfect.